Let's start, Zama.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflections 8th Annual PGM Roundtable. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we hope it'll be a fruitful discussion as we've had in the past years. We'll start immediately with the Executive Director, Mr. Joel Nechitenze, who will welcome you officially to the roundtable.
Thank you very much, Zama. I would say that for those who are involved in or are keen observers of the hydrogen economy, there are a number of place names that I think have come to symbolize South Africa's climb towards the summit of technological maturity and practical application. Besides the centers of excellence, among the names that come to mind are Bochebai, Saldanha, Dube Trade Port, Mugalakwena, Sasolburg, Val Triangle, Kucha, and Secunda. These are places where South Africa's Hydrogen Society roadmap is coming to life. Since our round table last year, many notable developments have been recorded. I'll just cite two of them. At the April investment conference, the biggest commitment by far was the 105 billion rand Hive hydrogen project to construct a green hydrogen and ammonia production plant at the Ngquga Special Economic Zone. This will also desalinate seawater in quantities that could meet a large part of the water needs of Nelson Mandela Bay. The second one is an announcement about 2 weeks ago that Sasol had in June produced its first green hydrogen at Sasolburg as part of repurposing a water splitting electrolyzer. These are just two instances of practical progress in the steady emergence of South Africa's hydrogen economy. However, the question has been posed, are we moving fast enough across the whole front of the roadmap for us confidently to say that we are on track to meet the targets we have set ourselves? Let me cite some examples from other countries to illustrate this point. In Namibia, the Hyphen Hydrogen Energy Project has been launched to produce green ammonia and reach full-scale production before 2030. Egypt's green hydrogen projects have been launched. Inner Mongolia, far away, has started construction of facilities to generate green hydrogen. South Korea is moving ahead to build 6 hydrogen cities. One can go on and on about taxis in Germany, China's first mass-produced passenger fuel cell electric vehicle, the Macho initiative in Tokyo and other parts of Japan, and practical projects in Canada, Greenland, India, Portugal, Australia, and elsewhere. It is estimated that there are currently some 400 fuel cell light vehicle models across the globe. And the total cost of ownership of these vehicles is projected to decline to less than that of battery electric vehicles by 2026 and internal combustion engines the following year. So it will be cheaper to own these vehicles by that time. Combined with the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States and similar measures in Europe, many argue that, in the words of Mining Weekly, the challenge of producing green hydrogen economically is now done and dusted. What is required is the necessary infrastructure for full-scale operationalization. As we all know, PGMs play a central role in all these endeavors. And there is much more besides, including new applications such as PGM-containing computer chips, more efficient lithium batteries, and carbon capture technologies. I think there are also many other issues that should exercise our mind. For instance, one of the current constraints is the risk aversion of financial institutions due to uncertainty around pricing and offtake demand. So, how do we ensure an enhanced partnership with development finance institutions? The other issue that should exercise our mind relates to regulation and standards. As we may be aware, the Hydrogen Council and the United Nations UNIDO last month signed a joint declaration on the development of a standard methodology under the auspices of the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. In this year's roundtable, we also aim to reflect on sustainable mining practices. And one good example in this regard is the Mogalakwena fuel cell truck and other applications, which can drastically cut carbon emissions in mining operations, with diesel use constituting about 80% of emissions in most of these operations. Local compacting and global security of supply are also matters requiring constant attention. Now, as with previous roundtables, and as Zama was saying, we expect vibrant discussion on these and other issues, the better for our country to take its rightful place in the global hydrogen economy and other PGM applications. At the core of all this is the need to ensure that the low carbon transition becomes a platform for South Africa's new industrialization drive. And it is in this spirit that the Mapungubwe Institute welcomes you all, and we wish to express appreciation that you have been able to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edie. I actually didn't introduce myself properly. My name is Zamanzima Mazibuba Makena, and I am a senior researcher at the Mapungubwe Institute in the Knowledge Economy and Scientific Advancement faculty. We will now have Mr. Stephen Bullock from Anglo American, who will be taking us through what is required basically for managing South Africa's mineral resources to meet the requirements for the just transition. Mr. Stephen, please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Just confirming you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. And then I'm also just going to share my screen, so just give me 1 second, please. And if you can confirm, you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity to address this 8th PGM Roundtable. So, as we all know, South Africa has extensive platinum group metals resources and reserves. And just as a reminder, this map that was produced by SFA Oxford is a good illustration of how extensive these resources are across the Bushveld igneous complex. And this particular map just shows all the various mines, both active and project mines, that offer a significant potential for South Africa. Also, just as a reminder, approximately 70% of all of the PGMs, and particularly across platinum, palladium, and rhodium, actually end up in internal combustion engines, automotive sector, as an auto catalyst to reduce and clean vehicle emissions. So, I mean, directionally, the world over, we are definitely seeing increasing electrification of the powertrains and a move away over time. And you know, certainly, I think we're seeing that there is a patchwork of powertrains likely to take place through to 2040 and beyond, with internal combustion engines, battery electric, hydrogen, and fuel cell electric vehicles all having niche applications. However, to ensure that we as a country can continue to benefit from our PGM endowment, we need to invest significantly into the development of new demand segments for PGMs, one of which is the hydrogen economy. It is for this reason that I believe we as Anglo American Platinum have been invited to discuss Anglo American's strategy and our role in the green hydrogen sector in South Africa here today. So as a mining company in South Africa, we are uniquely positioned to play a key role in the just transition, not only in Southern Africa, but beyond. First, let us define the scale and the nature of the hydrogen opportunity. Recently, the news cycle has been full of reports such as the launch of a €1 billion fund to back green hydrogen projects in South Africa. This fund, involving major strategic Dutch and Danish financiers, is said to signify a shared commitment to sustainable energy and a belief in green hydrogen's critical role in a future low-carbon economy. Why South Africa? It is because we have an abundance of wind and solar resources, available land, and the industrial capacity to become a key producer and potential exporter of green hydrogen. We already know about the $8 billion climate finance pact signed with developing countries in 2021, intended to help South Africa move away from the reliance on coal and towards green energy resources. As an economically heavily reliant on coal-fired power currently, we are at the forefront of the battle to secure a just energy transition. As the recent headlines on the negative impact of the closure of Komati Power Station on local jobs and communities illustrates. The Komati example demonstrates how enormously complex it will be to achieve a just transition at scale. Finding solutions to replace a century-old fossil fuel industry will take our collective best global effort. As Anglo-American, we believe this need for a just energy transition and the potential offered by the hydrogen economy can help drive a second great industrialization of South Africa, secure our energy supply into the future, diversify revenue streams for the economy, create jobs, and make the most of the resources with which this great country was blessed. including the PGM resources. Let me start with the global context of the hydrogen economy. Thinking back to where we were when the first PGM Roundtable was held many years ago, it is astonishing to see the momentum hydrogen is gaining around the world, and Joel touched on this in his introduction, with real-life examples driving the conversation forward and keeping hydrogen top of mind of the policymakers. There are now more than 1,000 hydrogen energy project proposals announced globally, with 795 of them planned to be fully or partially deployed by 2030. Compare this to just 350 proposals announced in about May last year. Direct investments into the hydrogen projects announced through to 2030 now amount to $320 billion, of which $29 billion have passed the financial investment decision phase. This is $80 billion up from an announced total of $240 billion last year. These projects are set to produce 38 million tons of clean hydrogen per annum globally by 2030. Given the current deployment of just 1 megaton, that is an astonishing figure which continues to rise. We also see PGM demand for hydrogen electrolysis. By the end of 2022, 700 megawatts of electrolyzer capacity was deployed, with about 9 gigawatts having passed final investment decision phase globally. 30% of this lies in polymer electrode membrane electrolyzer technology, which uses PGMs. Another growth area lies in fuel cell electric vehicles, which Joel also touched on. Today, there are 80,000 fuel cell vehicles on the road, up 30% from last year. In 2023, vehicle manufacturers will assemble more than 130 fuel cell vehicle models. Today, there are more than 1,000 hydrogen refueling stations deployed globally, reflecting growth of more than 50% from 2022. The Hydrogen Council, for example, estimates that the international hydrogen market could be worth up to $2.5 trillion by 2050. To even the layman, the hydrogen opportunity is clear, compelling, and sustainable. To share now in a bit more detail what we are doing at Anglo American, our hydrogen strategy is built on 2 key pillars. The role we believe the green hydrogen will play in decarbonizing our operations and addressing climate change and securing future demand for our metals. As I've mentioned, we see hydrogen as a key enabler of a just transition, with significant potential for South Africa to produce and export green hydrogen. The great potential offered by green hydrogen is that it can be employed in sectors that have previously been found hard to decarbonize, including long-haul heavy-duty transport, chemicals, steel, cement, aviation, and lastly, shipping. In addition, it can be used to store energy generated from renewables, where the intermittency of renewable sources creates a mismatch in demand and supply timing. But challenges remain. In July this year, for example, the UK had to scrap plans to test hydrogen in domestic heating in the town of Whitbury near Liverpool, following objections from residents. Concerns were raised about safety, the cost of installing hydrogen boilers, and the potential cost and availability of hydrogen at the end of the trial, highlighting some of the stumbling blocks regulators and the private sector would need to address to fully commercialize hydrogen technology, and work on this front is ongoing. We've seen governments like the US and the European Union contributing significant incentives to reduce carbon emissions and stimulate investment in new technologies, including hydrogen. For example, the EU's RE Power EU Energy Security Plan plans 10 million tons of green hydrogen produced per annum, plus 10 million tons per annum of imports by 2030. This alone would require more than 200 gigawatts of electrolysis. As Anglo American, we are also doing significant work in this space, and I'll now reflect shortly on a few examples. We cannot talk about green hydrogen without also reflecting on the need for investment in renewable energy. In South Africa, we have an abundance of solar and wind resources, but very limited renewable infrastructure to harness it. The mining industry is uniquely placed to help support the renewable energy transition. We have high demand operations that are concentrated in specific areas, land access, project execution skills, and the balance sheets to build and support an investment case for renewable energy. It also for these reasons that we've seen mining companies in South Africa, for example, Gold Fields and others, being some of the first to invest in large-scale renewable projects. Similarly, we are working on embedding solar plants at, for example, our Mogalakwena mine, our Amandelbult mine, and our Uki mine up in Zimbabwe. In addition, Anglo American has been working with governments and other stakeholders in South Africa to develop a regional renewable ecosystem. The aim is to invest in solar and wind energy as well as hydro storage to deliver 24/7 renewable power with distributed generation for our operations by 2030. This may look overambitious, but we believe it is entirely achievable. Anglo American has, for example, already secured 100% renewable electricity supply for all its operations in South America. Locally, we are working with the French energy company EDF, local partners and communities to invest in up to 5 gigawatts of renewable energy and storage. In addition to reducing our Scope 2 emissions and bringing cost savings to our business, it will also reduce pressure on Eskom, which is battling with severe capacity constraints, as we all know. South Africa's regulatory framework has improved drastically to support investment in this space, and we look forward to continuing our collaboration with government, Eskom, and other stakeholders and to ensure we can unlock investments and economic opportunities for our country. This brings me to the second pillar of our hydrogen strategy as Anglo American. Our market development efforts to secure future demand for our metals and particular PGMs. Currently, the bulk of our metals are used in catalytic converters, as I mentioned earlier, to reduce emissions. The shift to battery electric vehicles therefore poses a risk to our industry, with hydrogen offering additional opportunity to monetize our PGM resources as a country. In South Africa, the PGM industry employs 172,000 people, making it one of the largest private sector employers in the country. Considering that every employed person supports on average 10 other people, we dare not fail in securing future demand for this incredible natural endowment that South Africa has. The significant growth forecast for the hydrogen economy will offer significant demand opportunities for other metals too, including aluminium, copper, iridium, nickel, vanadium, zinc to support hydrogen technologies. This would include metal for renewable electricity technology and the electrolyzers for renewable hydrogen, carbon storage for low carbon hydrogen, or fuel cells using hydrogen to power transport. We know that reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement to keep the global temperature rise to below 2 degrees Celsius would mean a quadrupling of mineral requirements for clean energy technologies by 2040, according to the International Energy Agency. A typical electric car, for example, requires 6 times the mineral inputs of a conventional internal combustion engine car. We also know that today's metal supply and investment plans fall short of what is needed to reach the Paris Agreement targets, risking a delay in reaching these targets or resulting in a much more expensive transition. As a country rich in mineral resources with a long history of mining and an abundance of skills, we should make use of this opportunity by ensuring we have a conducive environment for investing in exploration, supportive of junior miners, and with the required infrastructure in place to allow our industry to flourish. Those of you who have been in the industry for a while will know that Anglo American Platinum has been investing in the hydrogen technology for many years, and Joel picked up on Mogalakwena as a phrase in his opening. In 2018, we spun off a number of these investments to start companies and technologies into an independent venture capital firm, AP Ventures, with us and the PIC each committing $100 million US. Today, AP Ventures manages nearly $400 million of assets, meaning every 1 million of our capital attracted another $3 million. AP Ventures now has 12 limited partners on board, including Impala Platinum, providing direct opportunities for collaboration to achieve scale to the portfolio companies selected. Since the launch of AP Ventures, over 500 PGM opportunities have been discovered, with investments in 24 PGM containing or enabling technology companies across the hydrogen value chain to unlock the bottlenecks advancing the hydrogen economy. We have also been advocating the deployment of fuel cell electric vehicles and deploying hydrogen fuel cell technology at our own operations. The first question is usually about the hydrogen truck, which you can see in the picture. So let me start there. Lastly, last year, in partnership with First Node, a specialist engineering technology company, we unveiled the world's largest hydrogen-powered mine haul truck prototype at Mogalakwena mine in Limpopo. The 2 megawatt hydrogen battery hybrid truck generates more power than its diesel predecessor, can carry 290 tons of payload, and is now part of First Node's zero-emission haulage solutions. We have made a $200 million capital investment in First Node and became the majority shareholder. The first phase of this pilot is now complete, and further development work is underway. Focus areas include minimizing refueling cycles with the adoption of liquid hydrogen design as opposed to gaseous, as well as the design and development of the next generation hydrogen truck kits and study work for liquid hydrogen production facilities. We are also keeping a watchful eye towards the development of the technology systems for hydrogen production. As a shareholder and a very keen shareholder in the development of the venture, as well as the hydrogen economy, the development of the solution into sustainable, financially feasible solutions is key. The truck project sits within a wider South African government-led Hydrogen Valley project that we'll hear more about a bit later, and contains a number of multi-partner projects in which we are collaborators, and we'll hear a bit more about this. Hydrogen valleys can be leveraged to kickstart the hydrogen economy, leading to cost savings through shared infrastructure investments, improving cost competitiveness of the hydrogen production through economies of scale, and enabling a rapid ramp-up of hydrogen production within the given territory. In terms of progress with specific projects in the Valley, we have submitted a business plan to the IDC to finalize KfW funding for Project Rainbow, which focuses on building a hydrogen freight corridor with trucks and buses. Rainbow is also looking to localize manufacturing and assembly of vehicles to support building a local supply chain. In addition, an SIP project plan update has been submitted to Infrastructure South Africa for consideration. Through this work, we hope to unlock multiple benefits of the hydrogen economy, potentially adding $3.9 billion to South Africa's GDP by 2050, and create more than 14,000 jobs in the process. We also have some exciting projects underway outside of Africa, and I'll just touch on these briefly. These include initiatives to help develop the fuel cell electric passenger vehicle markets in Europe, China, and the US. Earlier this year, we launched the H2 Moves Berlin project with Toyota, leading German taxi company Safe Driver. This project, which is the largest of its kind in Germany, aims to promote the use of fuel cell technology in commercial fleets, deploying up to 200 Toyota Mirai fuel cell electric vehicles in Berlin, and stimulate the demand for a network of hydrogen refueling stations. As Germany's capital, with a strong airport-to-city user corridor, available hydrogen refueling stations and entrepreneurs who are looking to implement new technology made Berlin the best fit for this. We also advocate the deployment of fuel cell electric vehicles in the UK, especially for the light-duty sector. We have been lobbying for appropriate government support to level the playing fields between fuel cell and battery electric technologies, and supporting the deployment of hydrogen refueling infrastructure across the country. We have other demand opportunities for PGMs, and obviously for South Africa's PGM endowment beyond just hydrogen. We believe that the growth in battery electric vehicles could also offer a future demand for us. In the US, we have invested with our partner Platinum Group Metals in Lion Battery Technologies, which is developing technology to improve the performance of lithium batteries, increasing range and lowering costs. And these batteries in the research phase do use PGMs. While definitions around e-fuels themselves are fluid, nearly all will depend on green hydrogen, in turn likely creating additional demand for PGM-enabled electrolyzers. Closer to home, Imperial Logistics is looking at a dual-fuel vehicle project using diesel and hydrogen, and these vehicles will also still require PGMs. The role for fuel cell and electric vehicles in the passenger vehicle market should also not be discounted. Fuel cell vehicles require significantly less change in driver behavior, with ranges and refueling experiences which are comparable to existing cars. Fuel cell electric vehicles also have different resource requirements to battery electric vehicles, and hence help to mitigate shortages of batteries. On the passenger car front, we have seen fuel cell vehicle releases from Toyota in 2020, Hyundai more recently, and BMW has also started small production of the BMW iX5 hydrogen fuel cell SUV. Honda recently announced that it will produce an all-new fuel cell electric vehicle based on the latest Honda CR-V, starting in 2024 in Ohio in the States. Consumers in China today can already choose from 7 passenger fuel cell electric vehicle models offered by different OEMs. On the commercial vehicle front, Stellantis announced a range of light commercial vehicles at the end of 2021. Most recently, Toyota has announced a consortium to develop a prototype fuel cell powered version of its highly popular Hilux pickup and its UK vehicle plant. Another high potential for fuel cell electric vehicles, and therefore platinum demand, is in the heavy duty truck sector. Many leading manufacturers, including Hyundai, Toyota, Hyzon, are already pursuing commercialization of fuel cell electric vehicles. We also believe electrolyzers will become an important demand segment for PGMs. At present, electrolyzer installation is small, but it is growing rapidly. BNEF, an independent research group, estimates that 1.2 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity will be installed in 2023, of which 300 megawatts will be PEM-based. Both are more than double that was installed the previous year. There is a potential for fuel cells in stationary applications, with South Korea the leading country in aggressive targets for fuel cell deployment for stationary applications. So what does this all mean for the future? So yeah, and finally, where to from here? As the world transitions to cleaner and sustainable sources of energy, it is clear that PGMs have a vital role to play in the development of new and pioneering technologies that will help address climate change. The greatest benefit for PGMs will be from the expansion and reduction in cost of green hydrogen to being competitive against fossil fuels. This is a key requirement to make it an economic energy source and unlock multiple sectors, further boosting the potential for fuel cells and PGM demand. The conversation about hydrogen applications is certainly more mainstream than it has ever been. As with the rollout of any new technology, there are bottlenecks and tipping points that must be passed to reach full potential. We are not mainstream yet, but we are definitely nearly mainstream. Just look at the International Energy Agency's estimated record number of electrolyzer installations last year and the billions of US dollar investments outlined by the Inflation Reduction Act. The decarbonization of transport and the relative decline of catalytic converters is going to be a long-term transition, moving at different rates in different markets. Within the context of PGM demand, specifically in mobility, there could be some challenges for PGMs from the late 2020s to the mid-2030s, and some current demand segments decline prior to new segments coming fully online, and South Africa will need to address this as part of the transition. The long-term hydrogen offset for autocats depends on the relative deployment of key PGM using hydrogen technologies, such as fuel cell electric vehicles and their loading and potential thrifting case. If fuel cell electric vehicles can capture just 10% of the global market share, that is a potential 5 million ounces of incremental PGM demand per annum. This is a meaningful amount for the overall PGM industry here in South Africa. We have also learned that for many other industrial processes such as steel, cement production, green hydrogen appears to be a key, if not the key, decarbonization solution. We firmly believe hydrogen technologies hold critical importance, not only for the sustainability of our business as we grow new markets for our products, but for South Africa and the world at large. The creation of a global hydrogen economy will deliver socio-economic development we desperately need, as well as to allow us to engage in the just transition that is one of the defining challenges of our time. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to the discussions later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. We definitely need to take advantage of our endowments with PGMs, particularly with the move to a just transition and low carbon economy. If anyone has questions, please do write them in the Q&A box. And once all the speakers have spoken, we'll attend to the questions and we'll have a good discussion based on all the presentations. Up next is Dr. Clarence. Dr. Clarence Chitereke from CLASA, who will also be speaking about the minerals in the just transition, particularly South Africa's vision and position on minerals in the just transition. Dr. Chitereke, please go ahead.
Thank you, Program Director. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, we can see and hear you.
Perfect. I must say I was requested to stand in at rather short notice, but I felt that the subject under discussion is something that I could make a meaningful contribution to. Just as a preface, and by the way, good morning to my former boss, Mr. Nechitenje, and every one of you. We are just coming out of a critical minerals summit, which we hosted last week. We hosted it in partnership with the Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy, the Minerals Council, and a number of mining houses and finance institutions. And primarily the objective was to create a platform for African leaders and African mining executives to really engage on a subject which is increasingly becoming very relevant and important in the discourse on mining and minerals broadly. And it revolves around critical minerals. Now, the subject of my input is how should South Africa manage its mineral resources to meet the requirements for just energy transition? Now, this is a very important question, and it's important because South Africa remain preeminently a mining nation. We have been mining different products for the last 150, 160 years at industrial scale. And we literally produce everything from aluminium to zirconium. And sometimes we just throw these names around without really giving specific examples of how they relate to our everyday life activities. Aluminium, of course, is found in alloys of pretty much the entire motor vehicle wheel assembly, whereas zirconium is used more in nuclear reactors. It holds the uranium pellets. So everything in between South Africa produces. And I think there was a time when it felt like, or it seemed like South Africa's preeminence as a mining nation was sort of waning down. For instance, the gold mining industry used to employ as many as 540,000 employees by 1987. And today, as we are talking, that number has really withered to, I have not checked the specifics, but it will not be anything more than 80,000 today from 540,000. However, the green energy revolution has now opened up new opportunities for South Africa's mining industry and its mineral resources to be relevant to meet the global demand once again. What we produce, as I said, from aluminium to zinc, is currently in demand. And some of these mineral resources that we have come to be classified as critical. In fact, there seems to be an emerging annual ritual in which developed countries in particular are publishing annual records of what they consider to be critical minerals for their economies. One could find these from the British, the Japanese, the Germans, let me say the whole of the European Union, India as well, and the United States. And when one looks at these critical minerals reports, they present minerals that are not readily available in those countries' national resource endowments. In fact, in some instances, those minerals are found strictly in the global south, and they do not have industrially available substitutes. And I can give you some examples of those minerals. Some of them are minerals that we are strictly in South Africa. For instance, a mineral product like iridium, South Africa produces 93% of whatever is produced globally. So whoever is looking for iridium would have to, in one way or the other, engage and find it here in South Africa. Now, I guess the key question is, how do we ensure that we sustain the global supply chains for minerals? And in essence, what are these critical minerals that the global economy is demanding from South Africa and from the global south? Well, at a basic level, I think we're talking about such minerals as copper, which is found in large quantities on the continent in the DRC, followed by Zambia. And of course, there are quantities of copper that are produced in South Africa. We are talking about lithium, which is found just across the border in Zimbabwe. We are talking about nickel, manganese. We, as South Africa, produce about 41% of global manganese supply. We're talking about cobalt, which is found in large quantities in the DRC. We're talking about graphite. Graphite is available in Mozambique and in Tanzania as well. Chromium, we have it in large quantities, so does Zimbabwe. We're also talking about others such as molybdenum and zinc. But what is critical, or what is of significance, these new, well, they are not new, but I guess the global interest is now making them more relevant than what most people thought. These are rare earth elements. And if I recall correctly, just looking at the periodic table, these will be elements that register from element number 58 to element number 71. Now, in total, there are about 17 rare earth elements in the lanthanide series of the periodic table. What is important to note is that South Africa has all the 17 rare earth elements. 15 of them are occurring naturally, and the other 2 are byproducts of various processes, including fly ash from coal-fired power stations and other processes that are undertaken in mineral refinements. Now, what are these rare earth? What are they used for? These are elements that are used for color television, for these cell phones, the video conferencing. We can also talk about the LCD screens in motor vehicles, tablets, night vision goggles, and even lasers. Now, the demand for these minerals is that they are not readily available everywhere. And therefore, the countries that have them, including South Africa, necessarily have to ensure that the global supplies are not interrupted. And at the summit last week, this is what was at the table for African leaders and ministers of minerals and energy. What is required is really a strategy. as it stands, South Africa does not have a strategy to respond to the global demand for critical minerals. And as such, we do not have a coordinated, harmonized approach. So what will that strategy do? We need that strategy, obviously, to enhance international trade and cooperation. We need it to fund exploration. Of course, it will help us attract the necessary resources. We need such a strategy to supplement industry incentives, to really define the scope and parameters of how we are not only going to mine these critical minerals, but how do we make them available to the global economy. We need such a strategy to define our approaches to research and development and the kind of resources that are required in that regard. And obviously, how do we sustain the global supply efficiencies? How do we manage mine tailings? And this is important because it's not just about us extracting mineral resources. It's also about us doing so sustainably without damaging the environment. In fact, in this regard, we would have noticed perhaps in the last 15 years or so, most of the mine tailings or the mine dumps around Johannesburg, some of those dumps were put there as early as the 1920s. And these are tailings from gold mining. And because they were put there in the 1920s, the technology that was used to process and refine gold was not as advanced as it is today. So the mining industry came to realize that there is profitability in processing those dumps, because if the technology used at the time was processing only as much as 90%, obviously then there is an additional 10% that could still be extracted of gold from just processing mining dumps, and therefore avoiding going down a 5-kilometer shaft underground. We also need this strategy to address the dangerous growth of artisanal mining. Every now and then we are reading in the newspapers of they're called zamazamas. They're trying to scavenge on what is readily available through processes that are inherently dangerous. And so equally important will be the question of how do we leverage our critical minerals to influence price? And obviously such matters as demand volatility, and how do we mitigate against global shortfall of critical mineral supply? Now, we also need to address the absence of downstream processing. And this is really important. We don't have these capabilities, particularly on the continent, and even here in South Africa. As much as we are producing minerals, we do not have the processing facilities such that we are able to export readily usable products. And it's important here because there are certain elements or minerals that do not occur in nature naturally. And such minerals are byproducts of various processes. I could give you a good example here would be plutonium does not occur in nature. Plutonium is basically manufactured in nuclear reactors as part of various nuclear processes or uranium refinement. That's just number one. Number two, an element like polonium, it also doesn't exist naturally. It's manufactured in the lab. And even of those 17 rare earth minerals that I've mentioned of the lanthanide series, I think there are 2 of them that actually do not occur naturally. Now, if we do not have downstream processing facilities, we end up exporting certain critical minerals that are only available from the processes that are going to be undertaken to process those minerals that we're exporting, meaning we're losing out on some of the things that we could benefit from. And unfortunately, we might even end up exporting things that we actually do not know, given the processes that are involved in mineral processing. So all in all, I think in summary, I would say we are not best positioned to respond effectively to the global demand for minerals or even critical minerals until such time that we have a strategy that can clearly define how our responses are going to be in response to the global demand. Now, there are various projections of what the demand for minerals that are embedded in our natural resources are going to look like, and they are projected in billions of dollars in the period between today and 2040 or 2050, as the world moves from hydrocarbons to green energy solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that informative presentation. It's something that we really need to be thinking about, how we position ourselves with this increased demand for critical minerals. I mean, including platinum that we are so well endowed with. And even the issues of the zamazamas that you brought up. And while we're there, our next speaker will actually be speaking about what that looks like. And it's something that we thought in the platinum industry, perhaps we need to start thinking about how that may affect the industry. So our next speaker is Machete Rakabe, who's a senior researcher at MISTRA, and he will be looking at artisanal mining and its policy and operational implications. Thank you, Machete.
Thank you, colleagues. Yes, your screen. Thank you very much, Zama. I hope I'm audible. So I've been asked to speak about something that is very topical and contentious, if I may say, given the current situation in the country, which is really about the artisanal mining and its possible policy and operational implications. So just to give you a little bit of a background, is that your artisanal mining activity is actually informal. And like any other informal activities, they are quite an enigma and a landmine, dare I say, because we really don't know much about what's happening in that sector, except for media blaps that we often receive about the zamazamas. And I'm saying this because we have gotten to know artisanal miners as involving the zamazamas, but not necessarily involving the small scale miners, which are more formal and may have gone through formal licensing processes. And we really have not paid a lot of attention to artisanal mining, historically so, because mining has always been a playground for huge conglomerate big companies. So we didn't really foresee that it's one area where artisanal miners can actually play a sector in as much they do in other countries like Zimbabwe and up north, where the economies are too informal, and as a result, they tend to accommodate informal activities, even as far as they include mining. So we now are battling with an identity and recognition crisis for the artisanal miners, and that identity is actually aggravated by the phenomenon of illegality. Illegality not only in terms of operational, but also to the extent that there is a growing, participation of undocumented immigrants within informal mining, or what you call artisanal mining. But also more importantly is because these informal activities, actually more lucrative than your traditional informal economy activities, such as selling tomatoes on the side of the road. And as a result, there is that recognition crisis, because if you are government, you don't want to be giving recognition to a sector that is potentially generating a lot of money and not remitting taxes to you. Also, if you're a competitor company, you don't want the sector to be recognized, potentially because it takes a market away from you. So South Africa, we're not very clear about what we should do with artisanal miners, and not least about their contribution to the hydrogen economy. I think the discussion is still very far to start even talking about how artisanal miners can contribute to the hydrogen, or they can either contribute or benefit from the hydrogen economy. So what we know is really based on sporadic research and estimates, many of which are very unofficial, they are very old, which is really a far outcry from the formal mining activities that can be accounted for. From an output and employment perspective, you can get statistics from Status A. Market capitalization, you can get good estimates from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Taxation, you can get very good estimates from SARS about what the contribution of mining sector to the economy, onto the tax collections. Location and reserve, I think the first presentation shows some maps about where some of these PGM activities are located within the country. So we don't know exactly where this, we don't know completely where these activities take place. There's, as much as we've got some good idea of where some of the activities take place, including the West Rand and maybe some parts of Joburg, and in KZN, where there's some activities on coal, and Northern Cape, some activities on mining. We don't necessarily have a very good handle of where these activities are located, because the mine tailings, as the last speaker has mentioned, there's just quite a lot of them. They are spread all over the country. So it's very difficult to really tell where these things are. What we also know, which is also based on estimates, is that the ACM sector employs about 30,000 men. There's women, there's also children involved, and generates a lot of billions in revenue. I think estimates put it at around 14 billion rand or so per annum. They are mainly concentrated in high value minerals, your gold and diamond. But as I mentioned, there's some activities which are now starting to happen within the PGM group, the PGMs. But its significance really is based on social value, rather than the economic and business value that we see with respect to the formal mining sector. So when people make arguments for accommodating artisanal mining, is really based on promoting livelihood strategy and reducing poverty, rather than making a strong business case or economic case for how the activities are likely to contribute to the broader economy. What you also know is largely premised on the whole notion of criminality and securitization. Because it's a lucrative market, promising lucrative rewards with very minimal investment. So a guy can just move from wherever they come from, go into a shaft, come back and get rewarded with at least what a normal citizen would get if they were to receive a social grant, for instance. So a combination of that very lucrative incentives and the informality makes this activity very prone to criminality, gangsterism, and securitization. So you'd find that at the bottom, you would have your small time miners, your gangs and the mining bosses, which are now rampaging the neglected shafts, the mine tailings that the speaker has spoken about, but also now increasingly they are storming active mines freely and unorganized. So you've got a huge number of what you may call independent enterprises going into a market as individuals rather than as organized groupings. They are storming into these activities freely, so they can enter and come out as freely as they can. That has got implications for how you operationalize those activities, and I'll explain later what do I mean by this. You've got a number of faceless buyers at the national level, which undercut producers. So producers would be your artisanal miners, of course. They cut them on price, they evade taxes. You also have a group of these sophisticated international buyer companies, unscrupulous, I might say. They facilitate export to markets, exportation of the produce to markets which are indifferent to conflict mineral protocol. So your Kimberley protocol, for instance, does not necessarily cover minerals or products that would have been produced through illegal mining activities, not to that extent as it does with those that comes from conflict-ridden territories. So when securitization happens, so the securitization that we see now is increasingly happening, especially each time when you speak about Zama, it's all about, about artisanal miners, it's all about securitization. It is securitization because the state now has to respond to, or the government now has to respond to, this growing gangsterism and theft wars that we're seeing on a daily basis. We're seeing it through the media, shootout with police, blatant shootout with police and private security firms within some of these within the mining areas, terrorizing of communities. Just yesterday, there was a teenager that was killed in a shootout between the miners and police. So they're terrorizing all these communities. We've had the incident of raping in Krugersdorp. We've had incident just last month in Rivali, in Jerusalem. So all these things, they're contributing to this securitization phenomena because they're becoming, or Zamazamas or artisanal miners are being seen as a menace to the communities. Because there's an involvement of so-called foreign immigrants or undocumented foreign immigrants, there's a threat of threatening the social compact that exists between the residents of the country or the citizens of South Africa and those that comes from outside the country. There's also the growing phenomenon of hijacking and invading active mines, which I've spoken to. Threats to underground infrastructure and people's homes. We have seen what happened in Joburg. Some people blames it to active involvement of Zama, even though the report that came out actually cleared them. But there is a growing concern that with the illegal mining activities that opens and explosives that they use are likely to put our infrastructure under threat. And there's health and safety issues, pollution because of the mercury that they use to dissolve what they generate, and also the deaths that occurs as a result of careless use of the explosive underground. Every now and then the police are called into some of these mines to exhume people who have been buried underground because of the use of explosives. Now, this is just to show the threats to communities, some of which lives next to where these activities happens. People's houses are actually under threat of caving in because of the diggings that happens illegally in those areas, and police obviously are under siege. They have to respond to this situation every now and then. Now, coming back to the subject of the topic of my discussion, is what then does this imply for the policy and how we operationalize the artisanal mining going forward? First thing first is that the policy response to artisanal mining must be evidence-based. It has to be informed by the prevailing circumstances, and also what our future goals with respect to developing artisanal mining in the country. If the decision is that this is something that needs to be supported because there is a business and economic case to be supported, for them to be supported. Now, there's a policy making decision tree that needs to be followed, which in my view should start with a decision over whether you allow or disallow these activities. And depending on which decision you take, you must consider the implications. If you allow, if you disallow, because you already have this huge mine tailings all over the countries, abandoned mines all over the countries, what do you do then? Do you just disallow and then leave those things and do nothing about them, knowing very well that disallow actually promotes criminality or informality? So, and whether the extent to which you've got sufficient police or security to make sure that people don't necessarily go back to those things. The second thing is whether you informalize or formalize. There is a policy, ASM policy, which came out last year from the Department of Minerals and Energy, which is more premised on formalizing the sector, but there's also other, other issues there about whether they are arguing that the only people who would be allowed, permitted to practice artisanal mining are only South Africans. So it's got other implication, and as a result, the policy especially came under attack. The decision over whether to informalize or formalize have got to be followed by another number of considerations. What's the regulatory framework that you're going to be using, depending on whether the sector is formal or informal? What are the industrial and market arrangements that you're going to be following? What are the organizational arrangements? This is very important, organizational arrangements, because the ASM, ASM sector comprises of thousands of individuals who are not necessarily organized along the lines of a formal, organization. So it's just a group of individuals who are not necessarily organized. So there's millions of them. So how do you make sure that if you formalize them, you start to encourage them to organize themselves, either as formal companies or it could be cooperatives or whatever organization that may take, so that you are able to control, but also you're able to control the activities, but also record the activities. The other considerations, what you deal with the issue of undocumented immigrant participation. Do you just simply ignore the fact that there is also an active involvement of foreign immigrants in that particular in the ASM? And the third thing, in my view, is that once you've made a decision on those first two, allow or disallow, formalize or formalize, what then do you do to promote market development? How do you support the sector so that it develops to the standard that is almost not necessarily equal to the formal sector, but at least it is a standard that is allowable, it is agreeable, and you can also support them through various state intervention. How do we develop that market so that it also we can start knowing how many people are employed in the sector? We would be able to know what amount of output does it produce. We would be able to know what taxes are we likely to receive, and also know where exactly potentially where are you likely to have more viable ASM activities in the country. So that is the extent of market development. And then lastly is your long-term agenda for rehabilitation and ASM accommodation. As the new mines or the current mines, the current formal mines, they close down, do you rehabilitate? Do you close them down? Or do you accommodate? Do you leave them as sites for accommodating future ASM activities? That I think is, for me, the four critical things for decision making, for decision making over the policy and how you operationalize the activities of ASM. But before you do that, you need a certain level of research insights that is needed to support your policy responses. And in my view, some of those insights have got to do with your national opportunity register. Where exactly are you going to be allowing these activities to be to operate within the country? Do you have some kind of geological mapping for artisanal mining, small scale, in the same way as you've got that geological map for formal mining activities? The allocation of mineral holdings. Currently, the current policy, which was published by the department, have got some suggestion about how to allocate the mineral holdings, including the transferability of the mineral holdings, which is not allowed in the case of formal mining. There's this issue of sale and beneficiation channels. In which sales channels do you allow? Do you still continue to allow them to go into the black market to sell whatever they find, or do you provide other channels through which you'll be able to count or to record what is produced for what the artisanal miners produces? How do you deal with crisis in communities, especially the social divisions, the threat to properties and rural farmland? And then there's the law and order issues. How do you deal with the law and order from the borders to the customs to the shafts? So the people who come in as informal, as undocumented immigrants, what you do at the borders, whereas when they enter the country, at the customs, what do you do when this produces leaves the country? Do you subject them to tariffs or not? And even at the shafts, what happens when people go into the shafts? Do you expect them to comply with the safety requirements in as much as you require the formal mines to comply? And lastly is the distribution. So what are the alternative mining value chain opportunities for unorganized survivalist business activities? Now, through that insights, you are now able to develop some kind of a policy and operational strategy for ASM that will then be the premises of whether you allow them to operate alongside the formal mining sector or not. Yeah, I think that will be the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, Sama.
Thank you, Machete. I think it's a very important conversation for us to have for everyone in the mining industry. When we speak about beneficiation, we speak about job creation, and yeah, so we just need to include the bigger picture about all the activities that are happening around mining. And now we have our last speaker, who will be talking to us about the Hydrogen Society Roadmap that was launched at the beginning of last year. Dr. Cosmos Chiteme will just give us an update on where the implementation of the roadmap is and the future plans for the roadmap. Thank you, Dr. Chiteme.
Thank you, Zama, and my apologies, colleagues, for joining the meeting late. I'm actually at a conference and I was relying on DG's diary. So I'll just put up my presentation. Do you see my slides?
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right, so I just put up a few slides just to give you a status update in terms of the work that we are doing on the Hydrogen Society Roadmap. It's by no means exhaustive, given the limited time, but I'm hoping that it will just give you a flavor in terms of where we are. So this is the outline of my presentation. I think most of you have probably engaged with the Hydrogen Society Roadmap as a document, and you are well acquainted with the vision. But I think as a country, we want to be a significant player within the hydrogen economy, because there are opportunities that can contribute, that we can leverage that will also contribute to our economy. So that's the reason why we are making investments in those areas. So in terms of the high-level outcomes, we are looking at decarbonization of the power sector with a very particular focus on buildings, as well as decarbonization of transport, where we are looking at heavy-duty trucks, shipping, and then eventually looking at aviation and trade. We will also, on the basis of the intellectual property portfolio that we have developed over the years, we are looking at then local manufacturing of value-added components that go into the hydrogen fuel cell value chain. In terms of our industrial sectors, we are looking at iron and steel, mining, refineries, and cement production as those areas that are energy intensive and where we think we can actually reduce the carbon intensity of the various processes. We are also looking to leverage the export opportunity that green hydrogen and green ammonia, as well as other derivatives such as sustainable aviation fuels offer in terms of us actually exporting to other countries. Let's say the European Union, Asian countries like Japan, where they've got a very clear strategy on the hydrogen economy, but in some cases they find themselves constrained in terms of production of green hydrogen because of they don't have the land to build those power plants. I think last but not least, I think we have always wanted to take a very inclusive approach in terms of how do we actually phase our transition from gray to blue to green hydrogen. And then we have got cross-cutting issues such as gender equality and social inclusion, which we feel are very key to address in our society, but they are also going to be very transformative in terms of addressing some of the social ills that we face. So this is just a slide that it gives an indication of the 3 timeframes that we are looking at. The short term, we are looking at scaling up, or rather demonstrating the production of green hydrogen, at least at megawatt scale. I think if one looks at some of the pilot projects that have been implemented, not just by government, but by private sector partners, we are already at a point where we are reaching that sort of scale. Then in the medium term, we are looking at scaling up at least to gigawatt scale with a focus on the hydrogen valley and looking at something in the order of 500,000 tons of hydrogen. Then in the long term, we are looking at scaling that up quite significantly, but also looking at sector coupling, particularly in those areas where we are targeting transport, industrial sector, as well as other areas where we think hydrogen finds some very meaningful and transformative applications. So in terms of where we are, given that we had about 70 key actions that we identified as part of the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, we have classified some of these actions based on the IEA framework, which is the International Energy Agency framework, where we are looking at in the area of establishment of targets and policy signals. We have implemented 2 policy, or we have been able to complete 2 policy documents, one of which was the Just Transition Framework, and then the green hydrogen commercialization strategy, which the DTIC and IDC are moving towards finalization. But I think what is more important is actually the realization that some of these hydrogen related projects are actually very strategic to the country. And in that regard, 9 of them were actually approved as strategic integrated projects. It's in the next slide, I'll give you an indication of which of those projects. But we also have quite a number of catalytic projects that have also come up, particularly involving the private sector in areas such as Sasolburg and Saldanha Bay, as well as even in the Eastern Cape around coal. So these are the projects that we approved by the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure in December 2022 through a government gazette. And I think what is important is to appreciate the fact that once a project has been approved as SIP, then it will benefit from better coordination, but also better access to resources that will be prioritized, as well as faster environmental updates. So some of the catalytic projects that we've been busy with, as you can see on the core CO2 to X, we have demonstrated the technology at a cement plant in Dwaalboom in Limpopo, and that was done in January 2023. And we were able to demonstrate that you can actually capture about 90% of the CO2 coming out of the flue gas, and we were able to then convert that CO2 into ammonium bicarbonate, which is a fertilizer salt. And we believe that some of these projects, given the coal-fired boilers that we have in the country, we believe that if we were to execute such projects, we can actually stimulate the domestic demand of green hydrogen and green ammonia in preparation for the export market. But what is also key is this technology could be a core part of our just transition framework, where we start looking at reducing emissions in our coal-fired power stations without necessarily shutting them down, so that those assets can still contribute to providing power, particularly under the circumstances that we are facing. So again, some of the projects are looking at making green steel, as well as creating a platform where we can actually test and validate technologies, particularly the Sasolburg area, where we are looking at collaborating with Sasol. They've already recently announced 3 research chairs on hydrogen through the National Research Foundation, where we are collaborating with them. But I think most of you are probably more familiar with the Platinum Valley project, and we are beginning to see some of those projects really being implemented. You may recall the conversion of the truck at Nkalakwena, and we are now looking at making available some resources through the Innovation Fund to fund some of those projects that have been identified along the hub or the corridor going down all the way to Durban and Richards Bay. So some of the work that we have also done is looking at some modeling work based on a number of scenarios. And when this work was done by the South African Institute of International Affairs, they considered 4 scenarios for the hydrogen economy. The first one being the business as usual scenario, where the only thing that we are looking at and within that scenario is really looking at export of PGMs, which is the business as usual scenario. So the only growth that we would then see is through the demand for the PGMs going to other countries to use them in the hydrogen strategies. Then we have the status quo with domestic hydrogen use, where we now start to see applications of hydrogen in some sectors of the domestic economy. And then we have the value-added manufacturing, where we start to then look at where do we play in the value chain in terms of producing value-added components based on our PGMs, namely in catalysts and MEAs that go into fuel cells and electrolyzers. But now when we start looking at the all-inclusive portfolio, which we consider to be the more desired state, we are looking at doing all these things with a particular focus on local value addition, targeting the export market, and also looking at a number of applications of hydrogen in the domestic economy, but with the export market in mind. So what we see there under that scenario is we envisage a total expansion of the economy by about 11.4% by 2050, and that is been modeled to be equivalent to about 665 billion. So here are some of the specifics around where are the jobs going to be created, as well as very specifically looking at the TVET sector, where we have most of our youth with qualifications, but they don't have job opportunities. So within that context, we have now started doing some training, specifically on hydrogen fuel cell value chain, but also on energy storage technologies through a 12-month internship in partnership with the private sector. This slide here is just illustrating that we need to start looking at really localizing the value chains in order to derive maximum benefit out of our PGMs, but also leveraging on our existing industrial capabilities to start creating a viable industry in this regard. So these are some of the components that we could then consider based on the intellectual property portfolio that has been funded by government, but also intellectual property that exists within our state-owned entities, as well as our private sector partners. This, I think you're well familiar with this. These are some of the deployments that have been achieved through the Hydrogen South Africa program. And we are just basically saying, we have laid out a baseline that we can now use to scale up some of these technologies at commercially relevant scale. I just want to conclude with just highlighting a few key messages to really say, I think it's in our best interest as a country to continue developing this hydrogen economy, as well as seeing where it actually feeds into other sectors of our economy, so that we can drive maximum value as part of the economic reconstruction and recovery. We are also happy that Cabinet did announce the extension of the Hydrogen South Africa program, so that it continues to drive the innovation to support the implementation of the hydrogen society. But I think what we are now beginning to appreciate and working on is to expand this innovation system beyond just the 3 centers of competence, so that more universities and private sector partners can come on board. And one of the things that we have now started doing is to say the partnership, we are going to fund the HISA program on the basis of the partnerships that they have with the private sector, so that there is a market pool coming from the from industry on those initiatives. One of the things that we have also been busy with is looking at how do we then engage with both the private sector and international partners to start designing appropriate models that will then allow funding to flow into the sector. We have just had funding approved through our collaboration with UNIDO on really putting up some institutional arrangements that will then start to bring these things together for the effective implementation of the Hydrogen Society. So I'll stop here, colleagues, and then if there are a few questions that that the audience have, I'll be very happy to address them. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Cosmos. That brings us to the end of our panel session. We can now get into the discussion. I see there are a few questions in the Q&A. Let me just see. I'll start with a question for, let me see, the ED. It says, hi Joel, have we given a thought to an idea of a multidisciplinary task force to look at the conceptualization of various mineral projects, beneficiation projects, that is? Do we have enough representation from the government, the DTIC and the MRE specifically?
Okay, thanks. I suppose I'm meant to respond. I think what I can say is that for a start, Dr. Chiteme may be the appropriate person to respond to this question. But from the information that I have, the Hydrogen Society roadmap is precisely meant to serve this purpose. As far as I know, it involves the DSI as the lead department, and there is participation from other relevant departments in government, DMRE, DTIC, then the private sector, the research institutes, and so on and so forth. But beyond that, taking into account the presentation made by Mr. Chitereke, I think the important matter is that whilst we're making progress in relation to the Hydrogen Society roadmap and PGMs, we will also need to then broaden the scope in the context of strategic minerals and the relevant value chains. If I'm allowed just to conclude by posing a question to Dr. Chiteme. He was not here when we started. We were saying one of the questions that has been posed is whether South Africa is moving fast enough as compared to Namibia, for instance, which intends to reach full-scale production of ammonia by 2030. Or is South Africa bogged down at the conceptualization and policy stage? Thanks.
Dr. Chiteme, you can answer that.
Thanks a lot for yeah, I think what we have to agree on is that every country will move at its own pace that is consistent with the national environment. And we are beginning to see some very tangible efforts being driven by the private sector on some of the catalytic projects, like the ones that you see in Sardana Bay, the green ammonia project, I think in Kupa in the Eastern Cape, as well as some of the catalytic projects that are driven by Sasol and other partners in Sasolburg and even Secunda on sustainable aviation fuels. So yes, we do keep an eye on what other countries are doing, but I think what is important is to say those projects that we are pushing as a country, are we taking an integrated approach that makes sure that there is really economic value that is going to accrue for South Africa. And maybe while I'm still here, I would like to perhaps just respond on the on coordination. One of the things that we are doing is we are currently preparing a document to cabinet where we are proposing an departmental coordination structure that is going to even involve the relevant ministers from different departments. But that will have to be dependent on whether cabinet gives us a go-ahead on that current structure, or there might be modifications based on the feedback that we are going to get from cabinet. So I hope I responded to the questions, this program director.
We have. Thank you very much, Cosmos. There's another question. It was for Stephen. I see he's answered it, but I would like for him to actually answer it on screen so that everyone can hear. I'll read out the question. It's from Barry Gomo. Hi, Stephen. What is the plan from Anglo regarding transferring its green hydrogen and renewable energy solutions into harnessing value chains in industrializations or skills development, especially in the areas of operations? There is Bujanala SEZ in Northwest, Rustenburg, Mofase, and some form of infrastructure available for manufacturing and skills development facilities.
Yeah, so as you say, I did put the answer in the chat there. The way we've certainly set ourselves up is we're looking at opportunities across the full value chain for socio-economic development in South Africa. And with EDF Renewables, we formed a new entity called Envusa Energy. And Envusa Energy itself now is doing the detailed work around what are those sort of socio-economic opportunities, and then obviously where are they best placed within the country, given where the renewable projects will be. As part of Envusa Energy itself, we are still doing work around an empowerment partner to form part of Envusa Energy. And then secondly, also looking at what is the community participation within Envusa. And then Envusa itself won't just look for opportunities around actionable renewable energy projects. It's looking across the full value chain for opportunities, be it in assembly of solar infrastructure, be it in the manufacturing and so on. And so that's how we've set ourselves up to ensure that there's empowerment in South Africa across the value chain. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. I would like to ask a question to Clarence. You spoke about us needing a strategy before we embark on supplying the world with critical minerals. Do you think the strategy needs to just be a South African strategy, or do you see it being relevant for us to actually partner or collaborate with other African countries in order to produce a strategy that will respond to the global demand of critical minerals? Clarence? Do we still have Clarence? I see we've lost him. Okay.
Hi. Is it? Sorry, I missed. Was there a question that was posed to me?
Oh no, I was posing it to Clarence, but it looks like we've lost him.
Oh,
okay, but there is a question in the Q&A, a comment and a question, I guess. It says the key issue is availability of infrastructure and resolution of power supply crisis. When will there be key decisions? GH needs lots of power and water quality. Perhaps are we able to allow people to ask questions? If we can unmute Vernon Harvey so that they're able to ask their question.
The key issue in all of this green hydrogen is how do we, I mean, the key challenge that we're facing at the moment is we don't even have enough power for our normal business activities. And obviously then and on top of that, we need to build power's availability for green hydrogen production. And I don't see the balance yet happening because, you know, who's going to say where must the development go for solar and wind? Must it first go to satisfy the needs of the economy, or must it then go to satisfy green hydrogen production? And the key challenge is how do we balance that? I don't know whether the hydrogen roadmap is dealing with that.
Dr. Chiteme, I think that one is directed to you.
I think some of these projects will have to be demand driven, because you need to respond to the needs of the market. I think for me, when it comes to issues of energy supply, I mean, I think that question is probably best posed to somebody from the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. But if I'm to answer from the hydrogen society, I don't think the desire is to have green hydrogen produced at the expense of the needs of the local economy in terms of power supply. But again, it's going to be very much something that is demand driven. And each project will have to be approved based on its merits. But I certainly appreciate the fact that we need to make sure that we've got adequate supply for our economy before we start looking at what we need to do externally. I hope this is just my personal opinion.
Thank you, Cosmos. I don't see any more questions.
I wanted to say, Zama, whether perhaps in addition to what Dr. Chiteme has said, we shouldn't also make the point that the production and utilization of green hydrogen can itself also help to deal with elements of the energy crisis. You can use green hydrogen for stationary applications in terms of mini or microgrids for purposes of generating electricity. As far as I know, for instance, there's an interesting experiment with the headquarters of the Mining Council, former Chamber of Mines, where you are in fact using hydrogen and fuel cells to power that building. Thanks.
Thanks, Edie. Cosmos, you can come in.
Thanks, Edie, for reminding us. Maybe I actually just forgot to highlight some of these, because hydrogen is very much going to be part of the power generation. Already we have turbines that are already blending hydrogen in natural gas. We just recently held meetings with the Japanese, so where they co-firing green ammonia and coal as part of the emission reduction power sector. So hydrogen is going to, and there are already some countries that are looking at increasing the amount of hydrogen, even in the blending mixtures, to see if they can actually get to the point where pure hydrogen can be used in power generation. So the stationary fuel cells, but also the other applications like mobility that are going to increase the demand for hydrogen in terms of using it as a fuel, can also bring the hydrogen cost to a level where even at a household level, we can actually start using fuel cells combined with solar to actually improve our energy system at residential level, because you almost use a fuel cell as a storage mechanism, just the way you are currently using lithium-ion batteries for storage of solar. Thanks. I hope that adds a little bit to the answer that it already provided. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, it does. Thank you very much, Cosmos. I'm just gonna ask our panelists if they have any last words to impart. Anything that you'd like to say just before we close? I'll start with Stephen, if you have anything you'd like to just add before we close.
Yeah, I mean, just thanks for the opportunity. It's been an interesting discussion. You know, certainly I do believe that this is an exciting opportunity, not only for the PGM sector, but for South Africa as a whole. And so, you know, we've got to continue to watch developments in the hydrogen economy and make sure that we do benefit from them as a country and as a PGM sector. And yeah, thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Do we still, okay, Clarence is still not back. I don't know if Machete, if you have any last words that you want to say before we close.
No, I'm okay, thanks, Baba. I mean, Zama, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Machete. And then Cosmos.
I think for me, it's just to appreciate the opportunity that MISTRA continues to create for us as stakeholders to engage and update each other on the work that we are doing. I think there's quite a lot of work that needs to be done, and what is going to be important is to coordinate those efforts. And we can only get to that point if we have these regular engagements that will then make us out of these otherwise it's about
Thank you, Cosmos. And Edie, do you have any last words?
No, just to reiterate what Dr. Chiteme has said, this opportunity is highly appreciated. And again, the involvement of partners from the various parts of the PGM and hydrogen society roadmap value chain is greatly appreciated, and we do hope that we'll be able to speed up our work as a country. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us this morning and this afternoon for today's discussions. We try to vary them and just include some of the topics that we haven't actually thought, that haven't been coming up as yet, just to think them through and how they can impact the PGM industry from being from the critical minerals angle, as well as the artisanal mining angle. These are the issues that we thought perhaps we need to also just discuss amongst the ones that we usually do discuss. So I hope you found those useful and informative. And of course, we'll continue having our discussions on how to ensure that the PGM industry grows and ensure that the country benefits from our endowment of PGMs, so that we are playing a critical role, a big role in the hydrogen economy. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next year as for our 9th iteration. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.